Next question from Mary Rostash.
Good evening, and thank you for being here. We appreciate the time that you're giving us to ask these questions. Just a quick, simple question. Recently I heard that banks are holding up on home foreclosures, and I'd like to know your opinion.
I heard the question. The question was regarding the banks, especially the larger banks, that decided to put a moratorium on home foreclosures here just the last day or so. And I think there was pressure by some members of the Congress and maybe the administration. What I heard on the news, was they said, well, some of the paperwork maybe wasn't done right, people weren't being treated fairly. That could be an issue, I don't know. But what we got to be careful about this, if it's across the board, if they were pressurized by Washington, D.C. to put a moratorium on because of politics, because we're less than, about 21 days, 3 weeks out from an election, that's a real problem, because that's going to cause problems in the banking industry and the housing industry, and what's the incentive for people to pay their mortgage? So I guess what I'd like to know, if there was pressure, or if the banks, I kind of figured there probably was pressure, but I guess the second part, banks, it's hard for me to believe that banks are readily admitting that they maybe made mistakes and didn't do the paperwork right. That's a red flag to me. Obviously, if there's issues like that, banks need to review those real quickly and determine if they did screw up. But to have across-the-board moratorium, I think the unintended consequences could be fairly severe in the bank industry, and people trying to get people that have the resources that qualify legitimately for a mortgage. It could be a problem to get mortgages, and I have a whole problem with the financial reform bill they just passed, because it didn't address the problem that would have precipitated this downturn, this economic crisis, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and I think it's going to add cost to consumers that want to get loans. It's good, and more regulations. Regulations are going to be more burdensome. We need some regulations, but we got all across the board. I don't care if it's banking, environmental, or what. We got to have regulations that make common sense and economic sense. And some of these regulations we're putting on are just burdensome, and they don't do anything. And there was one that this Congress and our Congress in space voted not to stop the EPA from regulating carbon dioxide. Okay, so they neglected their responsibility, turned it over to bureaucracy, and give them unlimited power. I know there's a new regulation that just came out because we got blackmail with the state and the administration here in Ohio, PUCO, Public Utilities Commission. Come January 1st, if you have a truck that's 10,000 GVW or bigger, now you have new regulations that kind of almost similar to what semi-drivers have to do, that just add costs to small businesses that have the smaller trucks, and it doesn't do anything to create a climate here where employers are going to hire people to get this economy going.
I've heard the news report as well. I don't really know what's behind it, but I can assure you that if we trace it back, we'll probably find that it had something to do with government oversight, and somebody didn't do their job somewhere. This is relatively recent, and just to tell you the honest truth, I don't know the details about it. But the government regulates way too much. The whole purpose of regulation, according to the original intent of the U.S. Constitution, is to simply keep regular. Somebody asked me this recently, and an analogy that I've been using is a highway. A highway has stop signs, yield signs, sharp turn ahead, those type of things. I believe that that's the federal government's role as far as regulation goes. But we know, just like the senator just said, that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac was the sort of the tilting point that started this collapse that we experienced 2 years ago and haven't come out of yet. So I believe that somebody did something wrong somewhere, and probably a government entity that cause this moratorium on mortgages. But I would agree with the senator also that that's just going to create more problems. In the long run, smaller government. In the long run, let the federal government regulate as they were intended to regulate, keeping things regular, and allow the states to handle the heavy duty stuff. Because the federal government only has 18 things by the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, that I as a congressman am even allowed to do. And to get down into the nitty gritty of these financial organizations is not among those. There needs to be oversight, and I think everybody understands that there needs to be oversight, but it has to be equal across the board. The federal government can't decide that Lehman Brothers is going to go out of business and this other bank's going to stay in business because they prefer that one. This is ridiculous. This is a free enterprise system that we have here. And I think that if the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac things had not been improperly regulated, that we wouldn't have had the housing bubble in the first place, let alone the crash that followed that. And many people who are now thankful probably that there's a moratorium on foreclosures probably would have never even had that problem. The whole deal with the loans that anyone could apply for and get, whether you had a job or not. I mean, it was pushed by the federal government. It was federal government's involvement that caused that. That's why, just railing back to the U.S. Constitution, stop doing those things that we're not supposed to do. We will eliminate these problems before they happen.